I was standing in the kitchen, waiting for the coffee to finish brewing, when I noticed her perfume. It wasn't the one she usually wore. After 50 years together, I knew the smell of every lotion, every shampoo, every single note she put on her skin. This one was floral, sweeter, younger. And it wasn't hers. "Did you change perfumes?" I asked, keeping my voice even. She didn't look at me when she answered. No, must have been one of the girls at the salon. But she hadn't been to the salon that day. I remembered clearly, she told me she was going to the store for groceries. I said nothing. I just sipped my coffee and looked out the window, pretending to be interested in the damn squirrel climbing the bird feeder. That's when it began. That scent, that lie, that little fracture in a foundation built over 5 decades. Her name is Ellen. We met in 1974. I was fresh out of the army, working construction in Tempe. She was a waitress at a diner just off Apache Boulevard. Her smile lit up the whole room. We married in 75, had 2 kids by 80, and a mortgage by 82. Life wasn't always easy, but we had each other. Or at least I thought we did. Lately, though, she'd been distant. More makeup. New clothes. Leaving the house at odd hours. She said it was book club, or knitting circle, or yoga. I never questioned her before, why would I? She was my wife. My partner. My person. But now, I started to watch. Quietly. Carefully. No outbursts. No accusations. Just observation. 2 days after the perfume incident, I noticed something else. She was smiling while texting. That might not mean much to most people, but Ellen never smiled at her phone. She used it to check the weather, maybe look up a recipe. But now, she was typing fast, then locking the screen the second I walked in. So I waited. That night, when she fell asleep, deep, open-mouthed sleep like she always had after her so-called yoga nights, I took her phone from the nightstand. It was locked. Of course. She'd never used a passcode before. The next morning, I asked her what she wanted for breakfast. Pancakes, she said. Her favorite. I made them with blueberries and whipped cream, just like she liked. While she ate, I cleaned the kitchen and slipped her phone into my pocket. I drove to my buddy Tom's place. He runs a little electronics repair shop. Told him I forgot the code to my wife's phone. He smiled, no questions. He owed me a few favors. An hour later, I was sitting in my truck with the screen open. Messages. At first, nothing too bad. Friendly chats. Emojis. Some playful teasing. But then I saw the name. Justin. A saved contact. No last name. Just Justin with a heart next to it. I opened the thread. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about your hands. Next time, let's try the hot tub. I'll bring the wine. And then photos. Not explicit, but enough. Shadows. Reflections. A mirror selfie of him shirtless in a hotel room. A hotel I recognized. It was the Desert Palms Inn, about 15 minutes from our house. Cheap place. She always said it was dirty and smelled like bleach. But now it was their place. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. Just a heavy silence inside me. Like something sacred had been quietly stolen, and I hadn't even heard the door open. I drove back home. She was watering the plants, humming to herself. Looked up at me with that same soft smile she used to give me after Sunday morning pancakes. And all I could think was, you don't even know I know. But you will. Soon. The next few days, I played my part perfectly. I smiled when I needed to. I nodded when she talked about her day. I even watched her favorite show with her, pretending like nothing had changed. But inside, I was watching everything. Measuring her movements, her mood, how often she checked her phone. She didn't know I had seen the messages. She didn't know I was building something. That Sunday, she left in the afternoon, said she was going to her book club. She wore jeans, a nice blouse, a touch of lipstick. Not her usual lazy Sunday look. I waited until her car turned the corner, then I grabbed my keys and followed. I kept 3 cars behind her the entire time, driving slow, sticking to side roads when I could. She had no idea. She drove to the edge of town, past the strip malls and fast food joints, until she pulled into the parking lot of the Desert Palms Inn. Same hotel from the picture. She parked in the back, near the side entrance. Stayed in the car for a minute, checking her phone. Then he showed up. Justin. I hadn't seen him before, but the second I watched him walk up to her door and knock twice, I knew. He was younger, taller, clean-shaven, gym build. She opened the door like she'd been waiting all day. They kissed. Not a peck, a full, slow, intimate kiss. Then she pulled him inside and shut the door. I sat in my truck, staring at the beige stucco wall of the motel. I didn't move. Didn't cry. Didn't shake. Just stared. I stayed there for over an hour. They didn't come back out. When I drove home, my hands were steady on the wheel. That surprised me. I thought I'd be angry. I thought I'd be broken. But all I felt was a cold clarity, like ice had replaced the blood in my veins. She came home around 7. Hair slightly messier, cheeks flushed. Said the book club was great, they'd discussed something by Nora Roberts. I smiled and said, sounds nice. Then I kissed her on the forehead and went to take a shower. That night I wrote in my notebook. I made a list. I titled it What She Doesn't Know. I have access to her phone. I know about Justin. I followed her to the motel. I saw them kiss. I waited. I can wait longer. She thinks I'm still blind. I stared at the 6th item for a long time. Then I underlined it. Over the next week, I started building my file. Screenshots of every message. Every photo. I printed them out. Made copies. Put them in a folder, labeled it House Repairs, so she'd never open it. I drove to the Desert Palms Inn, asked for the manager, told him I was writing an article about local lodging for retirees. Smooth as silk. He gave me basic info, even let me walk a few rooms to take pictures. I took note of the room numbers and locations. On Wednesday, she left again. Yoga night. I waited 10 minutes, then opened the drawer under our bed where she kept her old purse. Inside, the motel key card. Desert Palms. Room 114. That was all I needed. I called my friend Brian, who used to be a private investigator. Retired now. Told him I needed a favor, something discreet. He owed me for getting him out of a DUI charge years ago. He agreed. Set up a small camera in the vent of room 113, with a direct view into 114 through the mirror they always left partially open. Said he'd get me footage. No sound, but clear video. I waited 2 more days. She went out again, just like before. This time I didn't follow. I already knew where she was going. That night, Brian called. Said he had what I needed. When I watched the video the next morning, I didn't feel pain. Just confirmation. She undressed slowly. Justin stood behind her. He touched her like he owned her. Like I never existed. Like the 50 years meant nothing. The tape showed about 45 minutes. It was enough. enough to bury them both. I burned the footage onto a USB drive. Made 3 copies. One for myself. One for a lawyer I hadn't called yet, but would. And one I planned to hand-deliver when the time was right. By Saturday, I knew everything I needed to know. Where he worked. Where he lived. That he had a wife. 2 kids, too. I even found their Facebook page. Happy family photos, big smiles. Lies, just like mine. I wasn't going to ruin only one life. No, this had to be precise. Controlled. Devastating. That evening, I asked Ellen if she wanted to go out to dinner next weekend. She looked surprised. Smiled, touched my hand. I'd love that, she said. Good. I needed her happy. Because it would make the fall so much worse. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. She moved through the house like nothing was wrong. Cooking dinner, humming while she folded laundry, even joking with me about the neighbors. It was all pretend. A carefully rehearsed performance. But now I could see it for what it was. She had no idea I was 10 steps ahead. On Tuesday afternoon, I drove to Justin's neighborhood. He lived in a nice development on the east side, modern houses, 2-car garages, sprinklers running on timers. Cookie-cutter comfort. His home was beige with a blue door and a fake rock next to the mailbox. Probably hiding a spare key. I sat in my truck across the street for a good hour, watching. A woman came out with 2 kids, boy and girl, probably 8 and 10. They piled into a minivan. She looked tired. Not unhappy, just worn down. Real life will do that to you. So this was the family man. Mr. Fitness Instructor. Cheater. Liar. I wrote down the plate number of the van, the house number, and took a few pictures on my phone. Not for fun, for leverage. I wasn't about to make a scene. I was going to make something permanent. A crack in his world he'd never repair. That night, I created a new email account. No name, just a burner. I wrote a short message. Your husband is sleeping with my wife. I have proof. You deserve to know. I attached a screenshot, not the worst one, but clear enough. Her husband. My wife. His hands on her waist. Hotel bed in the background. Time-stamped. I didn't send it yet. I wasn't ready. I needed to be patient. One fire at a time. Thursday morning, I told Ellen I had to go into town for errands. Instead, I visited my lawyer. Old friend. We'd served together years ago. He didn't ask too many questions. Just listened. I'm not filing anything yet, I said. But I want to prepare. Quietly. He nodded. You sure? As sure as a man can be. We drew up a preliminary plan. I listed all assets. I requested that any shared accounts be quietly monitored for unusual transfers. She wouldn't notice a thing. Not until I wanted her to. That night, Ellen made her famous meatloaf. We sat across the table like we always did, like a couple on autopilot. She told me about a new yoga instructor. His name's Brandon, she said. A little too enthusiastic. Better than someone who doesn't care, I replied, smiling. She looked at me oddly. You okay? Never better. She had no idea that I knew Brandon didn't exist. That I knew she hadn't been to yoga in weeks. On Friday, I made a second trip to the Desert Palms Inn. I spoke to the manager again, this time under a different pretext, said I was writing a follow-up about local businesses bouncing back after the pandemic. He loved the idea. I asked about long-term guests. Anyone stay here regularly? Oh sure, he said. Couple people, actually. One lady comes every week like clockwork. Sweet thing. Older. Blonde. Real polite. She books room 114 every time. That was all I needed. I thanked him, left, and drove straight to my friend Brian's place. He handed me a USB in a plain black case. You sure you want this? He asked. Once you watch it, you can't unsee it. I've already seen enough. He nodded. This is the full thing. 2 sessions, 3 angles. Everything. I didn't watch it yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted the moment to be right. Timing was everything. And I was building to something big. Saturday came. She left around 4 p.m., said she was meeting her knitting circle. I waited 15 minutes, then sent the email to Justin's wife. I sat in silence afterward, staring at the inbox, waiting for it to bounce or get ignored. It didn't. 10 minutes later, I saw the email had been read. 20 minutes after that, I got a reply. Who are you? I answered simply. The husband of the woman your husband is cheating with. Then I hit send on the second email, this one with a short clip from the hotel footage. Just 10 seconds. Enough to prove everything. She didn't reply after that. But she didn't have to. The fuse had been lit. That night, Ellen was cheerful. Too cheerful. She poured us both glasses of wine and suggested we watch an old movie. We sat on the couch like nothing was wrong, but the air felt heavy. I watched her laugh at the same jokes we'd heard 100 times before. She leaned against me, her hand on my leg, the same hand that had touched another man just hours ago. And all I could think about was the look on her face when I would finally reveal everything. But not yet. I needed one more piece. I needed to see Justin crack. And I would. Very soon. Sunday morning started like most others. Coffee at 7:30, newspaper by 8, eggs and toast around 8:30. Ellen moved through the kitchen like she always had, humming a tune from the radio. It was one of those quiet, slow mornings that used to feel like peace. But now, everything felt staged. Her smile, her small talk, even the way she touched my shoulder in passing, it all felt like a performance she had rehearsed to keep me blind. But I wasn't blind anymore. By noon, she told me she had to step out again. This time it was brunch with the girls. She kissed me on the cheek, said she wouldn't be long, and left in her usual rush. I waited exactly 8 minutes before grabbing the folder I'd hidden behind the tool chest in the garage. Inside were copies of the texts, the hotel photos, and a printout of the motel manager's statement confirming her regular visits. I added a new sheet, Justin's address and details of his family. Then I got in my truck and drove. I wasn't following her this time. I had a different destination in mind. I pulled into a quiet neighborhood, parked 2 houses down, and walked to the door with the blue frame. I stood there for a long moment, then knocked. The woman who opened the door looked exhausted. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore a t-shirt with a faded school logo on it. Behind her, I could hear a TV playing a kids' show and the distant sounds of laughter. Yes, she asked, cautious but polite. You don't know me, I said. But I'm the husband of the woman your husband is sleeping with. She froze. I didn't move. I just handed her the envelope I'd prepared. I'm not here to make a scene. You deserve to know what is doing. You and your kids. She opened the envelope slowly, eyes scanning the first few images, and then the next. Her mouth dropped slightly, her expression somewhere between heartbreak and fury. He told me he was working late, she whispered. He was, I said coldly. Just not the job you thought. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her. Her hands were trembling. "I need to sit down," she said. We sat on the small bench near her porch. She stared out at the lawn like she wasn't really seeing it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked eventually. "Because I want him to feel the weight of what is done. And I need your help." She looked at me, confused. "Help? I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking for truth. I need him to be exposed. Publicly. At the right time, in the right way." She was silent for a long time, then nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" I explained my plan. I told her about the hotel footage, about the upcoming anniversary party that Ellen and I were hosting for our 50th. Family, friends, neighbors, everyone would be there. It would be the perfect stage. "I want him to be there," I said. "With you. I want you both to sit through that entire dinner. Smile for the cameras. Shake hands. And when the time comes, I'll do the rest." She looked down at the folder in her lap, then back at me. "You cold?" "No," I said. "I'm done being warm." She nodded again. "He won't see it coming. He never thinks that far ahead." As I left her porch, I felt a strange kind of calm settle over me. The pieces were coming together. My patience was paying off. Every lie they told, every moment they thought they'd gotten away with, it was all about to unravel. That evening, Ellen was in a great mood. She talked about her brunch, how Karen ordered too many mimosas and how they all laughed for hours. I nodded, asked a few questions, pretended to care. She had no idea I'd spent the day with her lover's wife. No idea that the net was already closing around her. Before bed, she asked, "Do you still want to go through with the anniversary party?" "Of course," I said, smiling. 50 years together. It's important." She beamed, leaned in, kissed me on the lips. "You're a good man." I looked her right in the eye. I try to be. That night I didn't sleep much. Not out of stress. Out of anticipation. The game was entering its final phase. And I wasn't going to miss a single move. The week leading up to the anniversary party felt like a countdown. Every day moved slower than the last, like time itself knew something was coming. Ellen was in full hostess mode, calling caterers, double-checking the guest list, even picking out matching napkins and centerpieces. She seemed genuinely excited, like a bride all over again. That irony wasn't lost on me. She had no idea I was preparing a very different kind of celebration. I spent that week finishing the finer details. I bought a new suit, clean, sharp, respectful. I scheduled a private meeting with the AV technician who would be setting up the slideshow and background music at the venue. A younger guy named Caleb, fresh out of college. I slipped him an envelope with a generous tip and instructions. "This USB," I told him, "goes in at the very end of the slideshow. No exceptions. Just let it roll. I'll take responsibility for whatever happens." He looked curious, maybe a little nervous, but he nodded. "You got it, sir." By Thursday, invitations had all been confirmed. Around 70 guests, close friends, extended family, neighbors, even some old co-workers. Ellen looked so proud when she checked the RSVP list. She even cried a little when she picked up her dress. "I can't believe we made it 50 years, she whispered. Neither can I thought. On Friday afternoon, I received a text from Justin's wife. She had agreed to come. She told Justin she wanted to surprise me and Ellen. He thought it was her way of showing forgiveness. He didn't suspect a thing. That made 2 of them. I arrived early at the venue on Saturday to help with setup. Ellen stayed home to get ready. The hall was beautiful, white linen-covered tables, soft lighting, a banner that read 50 years of love. The irony of that phrase almost made me laugh out loud. Caleb was already setting up the equipment. I handed him the USB drive again just to be sure. Last file on the stick, I reminded him. The one labeled Final Memories. Play it full screen. No fade out. No music. He nodded, nervous now. Understood. Guests started arriving around 6. Hugs, handshakes, small talk. Everyone told me how lucky I was, how inspiring our story was. I smiled, said thank you, nodded. But my mind was a mile away, already at the end of the night, watching it unfold like a movie I'd already seen. Ellen arrived around 6:45, looking beautiful. I won't lie. She wore the same necklace I gave her on our 10th anniversary. Her hair was done, her eyes sparkled. She looked like the woman I fell in love with. That didn't change what she did. It only made the betrayal cut deeper. She took my arm as we made our entrance, beaming with pride. Cameras flashed. People clapped. I forced a smile. Dinner was served around 7:30. Toasts began by 8. Our daughter stood up and spoke first, funny stories from childhood, her admiration for our commitment, how we were the example she looked up to. People wiped their eyes. Ellen squeezed my hand. Then our son stood. Said something about strength, endurance, and love through the storms. I almost laughed. He had no idea the real storm was seconds away. Finally, it was my turn. I stood slowly, cleared my throat. The room went silent. Thank you, I said, scanning the faces around me. Thank you all for coming tonight. 50 years is a long time. A lifetime, really. And tonight, I want to share something very personal with all of you. I look back at the moments that made this life what it is. I turned to Caleb. Roll it. The lights dimmed. The projector screen lit up. It began normally, photos from our wedding, the kids as babies, birthdays, road trips. Soft piano music played in the background. People smiled, laughed, whispered fond memories. Then came the final file. No title screen. No music. Just video. A motel room. Ellen. Justin. Slow, unmistakable. Her laugh. Her hands. His arms around her. The timestamp in the corner, just 3 weeks earlier. The room went dead quiet. No gasps. Just silence. Even the air felt like it stopped moving. The video lasted about 40 seconds. Then it cut to black. The lights came back on. No one moved. Ellen sat frozen, her face pale. Her eyes didn't blink. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but no words came. I stepped forward, voice calm. This is what 50 years meant to her. Someone at the back whispered, Jesus Christ. I looked at Ellen. I knew. I've known for a while. I just wanted everyone else to see who you really are. Justin stood up, face red, ready to speak, but his wife stood faster, grabbed his wrist, and yanked him out of the room without a word. My daughter was crying. My son looked like he'd been punched. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I just walked out. Didn't look back. Didn't have to. The party was over. I didn't go home that night. I drove around for hours, not because I was lost, but because I wanted to let the weight of what I'd done settle in. I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't second-guessing myself. But 50 years is a long time, and when you burn something that big to the ground, there's always smoke in the lungs. I checked into a small roadside motel an hour out of town, clean enough, anonymous enough. I didn't sleep much. Just sat there, staring at the ceiling, playing back every second of that night. By morning, my phone had 23 missed calls. 15 texts. All from Ellen. I didn't read a single one. Instead, I called my lawyer. I want to file, I said. He didn't ask questions. We set up a meeting for Monday morning. Everything we had prepared would be set in motion. At 9 a.m., I drove to the bank and opened a new personal account. Transferred a portion of our savings, my half, into it. Clean. Legal. Documented. She wouldn't be able to touch it without triggering alerts. Then I called a moving company and booked them for Wednesday. They'd pack up everything I marked in the house, photos, tools, clothes, personal files, and deliver them to a small 2-bedroom place I'd leased in Prescott. Quiet town. Good air. Far enough away to feel clean. Close enough to still keep an eye on the wreckage. I drove back to our home around noon. When I walked through the front door, Ellen was sitting on the couch. Same dress from the night before. Her face was swollen, eyes red. She looked up at me like she didn't know what to say. I didn't give her the chance. You've got 2 days, I said. Then I'm gone. And we're done. She tried to speak. I raised my hand. Don't. Just, don't. She broke. Fell to her knees, sobbing, holding onto my leg like some damn soap opera. I didn't move. Didn't touch her. Just stood there and let it happen. I made a mistake, she kept saying. It was stupid. It didn't mean anything. Please, please don't leave. It didn't mean anything? I finally said. Then why did it happen more than once? Why did you lie about where you were, who you were with? Why did you let that man touch you while you wore the ring I gave you 50 years ago? She cried harder. I stepped back. Her hands slid off my leg. I'll be in the garage, I said. Don't follow me. I spent the next 2 hours going through my things. Pulling what was mine, taping off what the movers would need to pack. I left all the photo albums behind. I didn't want them. Every memory in those pages had a shadow over it now. That night, I slept in the guest room. She didn't knock. Didn't speak. I think she finally understood this wasn't a game, wasn't a threat. It was real. Final. Monday morning, I met my lawyer. Signed the papers. Divorce filed. Irreconcilable differences. We attached the evidence packet. In our state, adultery doesn't change the division much, but it can influence certain outcomes, like spousal support, asset handling, public sympathy. He looked at me when we were done. You okay? No, I said. But I'm clean. And that's more important. Tuesday was quiet. I avoided her as much as I could. She didn't speak. Just sat in the living room with the TV on, sound low, staring at nothing. That night, I got a text from Justin's wife. Thank you, it said. He moved out today. He begged. I told him to go to hell. I stared at those words for a long time. Then deleted the message. Wednesday came. The movers arrived at 9 a.m. I gave them the checklist, showed them the tape marks. They worked fast. Professional. By noon, the truck was full. I stood in the doorway, looked back one last time. Ellen was in the kitchen, sitting at the table where we'd eaten thousands of meals. She didn't look up. Didn't say goodbye. I closed the door behind me. The drive to Prescott took 2.5 hours. The house was small, quiet, surrounded by pine trees. A porch, a view of the hills, a place I could breathe. The movers unpacked everything. I tipped them well. Then I sat on my new couch, looked around at my new life, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt still. Not happy. But still. I made a drink. Whiskey. No ice. Sat on the porch and watched the sun go down. I wasn't angry anymore. But I wasn't done, either. Because while Ellen had lost everything she thought was permanent, Justin was still walking free. And I had one more move to make. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The air in Prescott was colder, sharper than back home. I stood out on the porch with a cup of black coffee, watching fog curl along the tree line. The quiet was welcome. But I didn't come here for peace. Not yet. I came to finish what I started. Justin had lost his marriage, but that wasn't enough. He still had his job. His reputation. His life. He had walked into my world, ripped something sacred out of it, and expected to carry on like nothing happened. I wasn't going to let that stand. I spent the rest of the morning collecting what I had, copies of the footage, screenshots of texts, and a fresh set of records I had pulled from a friend who still worked in municipal business licensing. Turns out, Justin was not just a fitness instructor. He was listed as co-owner of a boutique wellness center. Elevation Body and Mind. The kind of place that served kombucha in the lobby and promised to align your energy for $120 an hour. I called the number listed for business inquiries. A cheerful assistant answered. I asked to schedule a consultation with Justin. She said he had openings on Thursday afternoon. Perfect. I used a different name. Fake email. Paid in advance. No red flags. Thursday came fast. I put on a pair of jeans, flannel shirt, simple watch, nothing that would draw attention. Drove 2 hours back into the city. The wellness center was exactly what I expected. Bright lights, scented candles, water fountain in the lobby. A smiling receptionist with bleached teeth and artificial calm. Hi, I'm here for my session with Justin. She checked the screen, nodded. He'll be right with you. I sat down. Looked at the people walking in and out. Mostly women. Some couples. All of them trusting the image he built. 5 minutes later, he came out. Same confident walk, same smug smile. Polished, practiced charm. Mr. Barrett, he said. That's me. He didn't recognize me. Not surprising. We'd never been face to face. He probably never thought twice about who Ellen went home to. We went into a private room. Soft lighting. Yoga mats. One wall lined with mirrors. He started the session with breathing exercises. I followed, silent, focused. When he asked questions about stress levels and posture, I gave vague answers. He bought all of it. Halfway through the hour, I stopped. I have a confession, I said. He looked up, concerned. What's wrong? I'm not who you think I am. That smile faded just slightly. Excuse me? I'm not Mr. Barrett. My name is Frank. I'm Ellen's husband. His face didn't change right away. But his eyes gave him away. That twitch of panic. That flicker of realization. He took half a step back. I think you should leave, he said quietly. I think you should sit down, I said even quieter. There was a tension in the air now. I didn't move toward him. Didn't raise my voice. But the weight in the room had shifted completely. I'm not here to fight you, I said. I'm here to finish this. He looked like he wanted to run. I know about your business, I continued. I know about your financials. You've got investors. Image to protect. All that balance and energy nonsense. He didn't respond. I have enough evidence to show that you used your position of authority to engage in a relationship with a married client. Some states call that professional misconduct. Others call it predatory. He swallowed hard. I've already sent the footage to your partner. The financial one. He didn't know, but now he does. I also sent it to your landlord. Seems your lease has a morals clause. Bad press equals broken contract. Why are you doing this? He finally asked, voice low. Because you thought you could my wife and walk away clean. Because you smiled your way into a family and thought the husband didn't matter. You didn't just break trust. You made a mockery of it. He sat down slowly, eyes on the floor. You're not going to be arrested. You're not going to be beaten. But your name is done in this town. Your face will be remembered for the wrong reasons. I handed him a sealed envelope. What's this? A letter of resignation. I suggest you sign it before your board forces you out. There's also a statement you can release, owning your mistake, expressing regret. They'll still toss you, but you might avoid lawsuits. He didn't even open the envelope. Just held it in his hand, defeated. I stood up. Oh, and Justin? Don't ever contact Ellen again. She's already ruined enough. I left him sitting there in silence. Walked out into the bright sun and got into my truck. Halfway home, I got a text from a blocked number. It was just one word. Signed. I deleted it without replying. It was done. I spent the next week in near silence. Prescott was quiet. Too quiet. The air, the streets, even the sounds in the house, everything had a strange stillness to it. There were no more lies to uncover. No more revenge to carry out. I had done what I came to do. Ellen was alone. Justin was ruined. And I was free. At least, I should have been. But the thing no one tells you about revenge is this: once it's done, there's no celebration. No sense of victory. Just space. Cold, empty space where the rage used to live. I woke up on Tuesday, stared at the ceiling for an hour, then made myself breakfast. Eggs. Toast. Coffee. I didn't taste any of it. I sat on the porch most of the day, not thinking, not planning. Just breathing. By Wednesday, the silence was unbearable. So I drove into town, found a hardware store, and bought lumber, nails, paint, everything I needed to fix the fence around the back of the property. Something to do with my hands. Something that didn't involve thinking about her. I worked all afternoon. Hammering. Measuring. Cutting. The ache in my shoulders was real, familiar. It felt good. By evening, I had half the fence replaced. I stood back and looked at the line of fresh wood, the straight edges, the clean finish. It didn't make anything better, but at least it was something I could control. That night, I got a voicemail. It was Ellen. Her voice was soft. Tired. I know you probably won't listen to this. I understand. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. You didn't deserve any of it. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I loved you. I still do. I didn't call back. I didn't delete the message, either. I just left it sitting there. The next day, I finished the fence. I started cleaning the shed after that, throwing out old junk the previous owner had left. It kept me busy. Kept my hands moving. But every night, when I sat down, when the tools were put away and the sky turned black, the silence came roaring back. That's when I started writing. I opened a blank notebook, wrote the date on the top of the first page, and began. I didn't plan what to say. I didn't try to make it poetic. I just wrote whatever came to mind. I wrote about Ellen. About our first apartment with the leaking pipes. About our son being born on a rainy Tuesday morning. About her laugh when she drank wine too fast. And then I wrote about the night I found out. The scent on her clothes. The motel. The silence in the truck after watching her walk into that room. Page after page. By Sunday, I'd filled half the notebook. And strangely, I didn't feel empty anymore. I felt grounded. That afternoon, I drove into town again. There was a small diner near the post office, plain, simple, like the ones I used to go to back in Tempe. I sat at the counter, ordered coffee and a slice of cherry pie. The waitress looked about my age. Wore her hair tied back. Kind eyes. No ring on her finger. "You just moved into town?" she asked. "Couple weeks ago," I replied. "Welcome to Prescott. We move a little slower here. I think I'm ready for that." She smiled. Good pie helps. I came back the next day. And the day after that. Her name was Margaret. Widowed. 2 kids grown and out of state. She'd been working at the diner for 15 years. Said it kept her busy. She was kind, but not soft. Sharp wit. Dry humor. She didn't ask too many questions, and I appreciated that. After a week, she started bringing my coffee without asking. After 2, she started sitting with me during her break. We didn't talk about the past. Not hers. Not mine. It was quiet. And for the first time, I didn't mind the quiet. One evening, she asked if I wanted to walk with her after close. We walked 2 blocks, then 3. Talked about the town. The people. The smell of rain on asphalt. It was simple. Clean. Real. That night, when I got home, I didn't think about Ellen. I didn't think about Justin. I thought about how Margaret laughed when the wind caught her hair, and she tried to hold it down with one hand and failed. And I smiled. Not forced. Not fake. Just real. By the 3rd week in Prescott, Margaret had become part of my routine. Every morning at 8:30, I sat at the same booth near the window, and she'd bring my coffee without asking. We talked about the weather, her customers, old stories from when her kids were still small. She didn't pry, and I didn't offer more than I wanted to. It was understood. There was a gentleness to her company. Not romance, not yet, but something quieter. A companionship I hadn't realized I'd missed. One Thursday morning, as I was sipping my coffee and flipping through the local paper, she walked by and paused. "Frank," she said, "you want to come over for dinner this weekend?" "Nothing fancy. Just roast chicken and a few vegetables." I looked up. Her eyes were steady, kind, unafraid. "I'd like that," I said. Saturday evening, I brought a bottle of red wine and knocked on her door. Small house, older than mine, but cozy. The porch light had a soft yellow glow. When she opened the door, the smell of garlic and herbs wrapped around me like a memory. "Come in," she said. Shoes off. Carpets new. We ate in her kitchen. Talked about nothing important. She told me about her late husband, how he used to fix everything with duct tape and prayer. I told her about an old dog I had when the kids were little, how he used to wait by the door every night until I got home. It was the first time I spoke about my past without the weight. When dinner was done, she poured tea, and we sat in her living room with our cups in hand, a soft jazz station playing in the background. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "You talk like a man who's been broken and put back together. But something tells me not all the pieces made it back." I didn't answer right away. "I lost my marriage," I finally said. "But I didn't lose myself. I just forgot who I was for a while." "That's fair," she said. "Just don't forget again." When I left her house that night, she kissed me on the cheek. No promises. No pressure. Just something real. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of peace. Not closure, because I wasn't sure that ever really comes, but acceptance. The storm had passed. The ruins were mine to rebuild or leave behind. And then I got the letter. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address, no stamp. Someone had slid it under my front door. I opened it slowly, expecting maybe a message from the landlord, or a flyer. But the handwriting stopped me cold. It was Ellen's. The letter was short. Barely a page. Frank, I know I've lost the right to be heard. But there are things you still don't know. I didn't write to change your mind, I don't expect forgiveness. But I do owe you truth, even if it comes too late. Justin wasn't the first. And he wasn't the only reason I drifted. It started a year after we lost your brother. You remember that summer. You stopped talking for a while. Stopped touching. I thought it was grief. I waited. Then I gave up waiting. I'm not excusing what I did. I was weak. I was angry. I felt invisible. You always loved the version of me that stayed loyal, obedient, quiet. I stopped being her years ago. And I hated pretending. I thought you didn't notice. Turns out you noticed everything. You always did. I never stopped loving you, but somewhere along the way, I stopped being yours. And I think, deep down, you stopped being mine. I hope the silence gave you peace. Ellen. I sat there with the letter in my hands for what felt like an hour. It didn't make me angry. It didn't change anything. But it explained things I hadn't let myself admit. We had drifted long before the cheating. We'd just kept up the motions out of habit, out of comfort. I wasn't blameless. I had shut down. Stopped seeing her. But she chose betrayal instead of conversation. And that was the difference. I folded the letter once, carefully, and placed it in the drawer by my bed. Not to keep her close, but as a reminder. That evening, I walked back to Margaret's diner. She was cleaning up after closing. Trouble? She asked when she saw me. No, I said. Just didn't feel like being alone. She poured me a cup of coffee. Sat across from me. No questions. Just presence. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. It had been almost 2 months since the night of the anniversary party. I hadn't spoken to Ellen since the letter. She hadn't tried to reach out again, and I hadn't gone looking. Some things didn't need closure. They just needed distance. I had moved my life to Prescott, built something small and quiet. And I had kept it that way. The town was starting to feel like mine. Mornings with coffee on the porch. Afternoons fixing up the shed, replacing the warped wood panels with my own hands. Evenings with Margaret, sometimes in silence, sometimes in soft conversation. We didn't define anything. We didn't rush. It wasn't about replacing the past, it was about finally stepping out from under its shadow. One Sunday morning, I drove to the farmer's market on the edge of town. Bought a basket of apples, a jar of local honey, and a fresh loaf of bread. The kind of simple ritual that meant nothing to the outside world, but meant everything to me. On the way back, I stopped by the post office. Inside my box was a legal envelope. I opened it in the truck. Inside was a single sheet of paper, stamped and signed. The divorce was final. I sat there, reading it again and again, not because I didn't believe it, but because of what it meant. It wasn't sadness that came over me. Not relief either. Just a quiet finality. The closing of a door that had been open too long. When I got home, I placed the paper in the drawer next to Ellen's letter. 2 parts of the same ending. No ceremony. No regret. just a finished chapter. That evening, Margaret came by with a homemade peach cobbler and 2 forks. We ate it on the porch as the sun dipped low over the hills. She noticed the envelope on the table behind me. "That it?" she asked. I nodded. She didn't say anything for a long while. Just took another bite. "Now what?" she finally said. I thought about it. "I think, now I just live." The next morning, I woke up early and drove out to the lake. It was the same one Margaret had mentioned on one of our walks. Quiet. Hidden. Surrounded by pine trees and the sound of wind. I brought a small tackle box and an old rod. I didn't expect to catch anything. That wasn't the point. I cast once. Twice. The line hit the water with a soft flick. And I remembered something. Years ago, when our son was little, I took him fishing on a trip through Colorado. He couldn't sit still, kept asking when the fish would bite. I told him, sometimes, the point isn't to catch anything. Sometimes the point is to be where the water is. I hadn't thought about that day in years. But now, sitting by the lake, it came back like it happened yesterday. I didn't need revenge anymore. Didn't need closure. Didn't need forgiveness. I just needed the quiet. I stayed there all afternoon. That evening, when I returned, Margaret was on my porch, reading a book. She looked up, smiled. No questions. No pressure. Just presence. We sat together for hours without speaking. Eventually, she rested her head on my shoulder. And I let her. The past was still there. All of it. But it wasn't chasing me anymore. I had faced it. Burned it. Buried it. Now, I was free to build something new. And maybe, just maybe, that something could be good.